درجاتك العليا أن تبلغنا شهر رمضان وأن تكتبنا فيه من عتقائك من النار. اللهم أعتق رقابنا ورقاب آبائنا وأمهاتنا وإخواننا وأخواتنا من النار وادخلنا الجنة مع الأبرار يا عزيز يا غفار. Oh Allah, we pray to you and we beseech you and we call upon you that you bless us in these days and that you help us navigate through our hardships and our difficulties. We ask you, Allah, to bless us to witness Ramadan and to record us among those who strive for excellence and ihsan in the month of Ramadan and to emancipate us from hell. We ask you, Allah, to make this Ramadan a very special one for every single one of us. We pray to you, O Allah, even though this Ramadan may be different and we may not be able to congregate and gather in the masajid, that you inspire every one of us to perform the ibadah and acts of worship that will bring us closer to you and bring us closer to spiritual awareness and spiritual realization. Allahumma ameen, Allahumma ameen, wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Amma ba'd, brothers and sisters, today we have a special segment of the community hub, being that it is the last community hub before Ramadan. Inshallah ta'ala, next Friday will be the first day of our fasting. I wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to go over some of the things relating to the fiqh of fasting. I'll start off with a few things relating to spirituality, and then I'll go over some of the ahkam, whatever we can, in terms of the fiqh rulings of the month of fasting. I'm also taking questions. We posted the number on our Facebook page. If you have any specific questions relating to fasting that you want to get clarity on, I am here to assist if in any way I can. The number is 862-208-3638. You could also put it in the chat box. I will check at the end if there's any questions in the chat box, but the best means to get your question answered is to send a text to 862-208-3638. Inshallah, even though this is the last community hub before Ramadan, we're going to have a community hub Ramadan special throughout the month, especially taking advantage of the opportunity of us using the online platform. We're going to have a virtual Ramadan as a community. We won't be able to gather in the masjid for our normal i'tikafs that we would do Friday night and Saturday night. So inshallah, we'll have a community hub Ramadan special every Friday. We'll also have some guests, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, and do a few different special programs throughout the month. For starters, what does Ramadan mean? Linguistically, they say Ramadan comes from a few different things. One thing is it comes from Ramadat al-fisalu min al-har. And al-fisal refers is the plural form of the child of the camel. They used to say Ramadat al-fisalu min al-har, that the young camels felt the heat of the sun on their feet from the desert. And there's a relationship between this linguistic meaning and the name and the title Ramadan, because for us, Ramadan is a means by which our internal lowly passions, our shahawat, our appetites, our desires burn in a gentle way. You are able to break free from the addictions that have consumed your life throughout the entire year. So it's a great opportunity to break free, and from that, in that sense, that's why it's referred to as Ramadan, because those lowly passions burn and cease to exist and cease to have the same power and influence that they normally would have. And this is witnessed for believers in the month of Ramadan. So this is one of the wisdoms behind its name. Another wisdom, they say, is it comes from al-ramad, and that is a light, gentle rain that would happen in desert Arabia. And in this sense, Ramadan is a time in which our wrongdoing is washed away by the effects and the athar of ibadah. Everyone feels it in Ramadan. You feel a sense of spiritual awakeness, you feel light within, you feel a sense of happiness and serenity. This, if you feel that, that means that Ramadan's having its intended effect. There's also other things to mention about the effect of fasting on the believer. Going from the meaning of Ramadan to the meaning of Siyam, the Prophet ﷺ described Siyam as a protection. As-Siyamu Junnah. Fasting is a protection. Protection from what? It's a protection from the nafs and the ego. Taking a grip on our lives, and it's a protection from many different things, shahawat and desires. So there's actually an interesting thing here. The siyam is referred to as junnah. In Arabic language, when the jim and the noon come together, they refer to something that is usually covered up or hidden. Like you have the Jannah, for example, because فيها ما لا عين رأت ولا أذن سمعت ولا خطر على قلب بشر. You have the jinn, a creation of Allah that we cannot see. You have the janeen, referring to the fetus. You have the janan, which is in reference to the heart, right? So the Jannah, so fasting as a junnah means it protects the soul, it safeguards the soul, it covers the soul up from all of those negative influences that come from desires. Now, this takes us to the meaning of siyam. They say صامت الريح إذا سكنت. صامت الريح إذا سكنت. What does siyam mean? Comes from a few different things. One meaning is that the winds calm. We refer to this as a form of siyam. صامت الخيل إذا توقفت عن ركضها, when it stops running. And in this case, you can liken it to the nafs. When the nafs stops running away from Allah Azza wa Jal by committing sins, the rebellious nature of the nafs. صام عن الكلام أي سكت عن الكلام. When the individual performs siyam from speech, means he stops speaking, right? So these are some of the meanings behind the word siyam. Now, what's the purpose of fasting? Why do we fast? There's a lot of wisdoms behind fasting, but the essence of it is to actualize a sense of servitude in our relationship with Allah Azza wa Jal. The purpose of fasting is لِتَحْقِيقِ الْعُبُودِيَّةِ. And what that means exactly is to reach a point in our connection with Allah Azza wa Jal that we feel His watchfulness over us. That when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, don't eat, we don't eat. And when He says, don't fast, we don't fast. That's why one of the virtues of fasting is as soon as Maghrib comes in, to break the fast, because that's the obligation of the moment. And when it comes to not eating, fasting is a very, very private and intimate act of worship. This is between you and your Creator, because very easily you can do something that breaks your fast without anyone knowing about it. And that's why fasting is one of the things that Allah Azza wa Jal mentions in the Hadith Qudsi that is exclusively for Him. As-sawmu li wa ana ajzi bih. Fasting is for me and I reward for fasting. So it's an exclusive reward. Allah gives the reward without recompense. He could give as much reward for the person fasting as He decrees, subhanah. So there's a lot of things, brothers and sisters, to consider with Ramadan coming in. Those are a few things that I wanted to share as sort of a spiritual introduction. We've shared many things in the khutbah today, in the khutbah last week, in our Sunday seminar last week that we gave, me and Shaykh Qatanani and Shaykh Yusuf, and we'll continue to share things about tips on how to perceive the virtue of fasting, the month of Ramadan, and how to maximize the benefit of the month spiritually. But I did want to focus the rest of the time on the fiqh of fasting. And there's just so much to discuss when it comes to the fiqh of fasting Ramadan. But I'm going to try to focus on the most essential things, or the basic concepts surrounding the fiqh of fasting. Now, it's important to understand the origins of fasting. Where does fasting come from? Now, fasting had different stages in its legislation in the early days of Islam. The Prophet ﷺ and the companions were not required to fast the month of Ramadan until the second year after Hijrah, meaning after the Prophet ﷺ was settled in Medina with the companions. So you're talking about 15 years after revelation began to the Prophet ﷺ. That's when the obligation of fasting was mandated. Now, relating to that, what were the stages before the obligation of fasting Ramadan? The first stage was the requirement of fasting Ashura. They mention in the books that there's a hadith that mentions أحيل الصيام ثلاثة أحوال. There were three stages for fasting. The first one was the obligation of fasting Ashura, the 10th of Muharram, and 3 days from every month. And then after that, the obligation was, or actually the option was, the option was to either fast Ramadan or instead to give fidya. And this is mentioned in the verses of Siyam. The verses of Siyam, they're in Surah Al-Baqarah, only in Surah Al-Baqarah, not anywhere else in the Quran. It's in the second chapter of the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامُ كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. He says, أَيَّامًا مَعْدُودَاتٍ. There are a few days. فَمَنْ شَهِدَ مِنْكُمُ الشَّهْرَ فَلْيَصُمْهُ ومن كان مريضا أو على سفر فعدة من أيام أخر. And then he says, وعلى الذين يطيقونه فدية طعام مسكين. The verse says the following: whoever witnesses the month should fast it. Sorry, that's in the second verse. The first verse says, وَعَلَى الَّذِينَ فِدْيَةٌ طَعَامُ مِسْكِينٍ. For those who are capable to fast, but choose not to. This is one of the interpretations of it. Those who are capable to fast, but choose not to, upon them is to give a monetary fidya for every day they choose not to fast. That was the second stage of fasting. And then this was abrogated when in the next verse after that, فَمَنْ شَهِدَ مِنْكُمُ الشَّهْرَ فَلْيَصُمْهُ. Whoever witnesses the month must fast it, right? So this is when the obligation of fasting came in. Now it's very interesting, the storyline of fasting and our identity as an ummah. There's a lot to speak about in terms of the lessons to be learned from Surah Al-Baqarah. In Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks a lot about the nation before us, Bani Israel, and he mentions the verse of changing the Qibla, and then he mentions the revelation of the Quran and the verses about Ramadan. A lot in that storyline shows us that one of the factors for the Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam is the month of Ramadan. And the identity of the Ummah is inspired by the Quran, the everlasting miracle of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, after that, after that introduction, so it's important to note the following. You know, there were different stages of legislation for fasting. After fasting was obligated, there are hadith that show us that the companions, when they fasted, they actually had different rules in the early days than we have today. And that was changed by the revelation of some verses. The hadith mentions that the individual who, during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the requirement of abstaining from eating and engaging in fast was tied to one of two things. Either Fajr coming in or the individual sleeping at night. And there's actually an interesting hadith. One of the companions, his name is Qais ibn al-Ansari. It's reported that he came home one night after Maghrib and he was getting ready to break his fast. But time passed until his wife had prepared the food and he fell asleep. And when he fell asleep, his wife noticed that he fell asleep and she told him that you missed your opportunity to break your fast. And because of that, he went on to fast into the next day. And during the middle of the day, he fainted because, of course, he had not eaten for more than a day. And Allah Azza wa Jal then revealed to the Prophet ﷺ the verses that allow the individual to eat even if he had slept from the night, as long as it's before the break of dawn. That's the last verse of fasting, by the way. And the rest of the verse goes on to detail how the companions and the Prophet ﷺ were to observe the fast, ثم أتموا الصيام إلى الليل. And then the Prophet ﷺ was told in this verse, حتى يتبين لكم الخيط الأبيض من الخيط الأسود من الفجر. That the fasting, the obligation of fasting was then tied to the Fajr certainly coming in and the daylight being distinguished from the night. So that's a little bit about the history of fasting. Now, when it comes to the requirements for the validity of fasting, there's a few things that one must do in order for the fast to be valid. The first thing is obviously the intention, because إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. The way an ibadah is distinguished from a ada, the way an act of worship is distinguished from a habit, is by intentions. Now, when does this intention need to happen? Now, is the intention something verbal? No, it's not. Something in the heart, right? The intention is something in the heart. But when must this intention for fasting happen? Now, there's a difference between nawafil and fara'id when it comes to fasting. When we're talking about an extra fast, like a recommended fast, say you want to fast a Thursday or a Monday, or you want to fast the middle days in the month, 13, 14, and 15. If you did not intend to fast the day, but you didn't eat anything, and sometime after Fajr, maybe 10 a.m., 11 a.m., 12 p.m., you have the intention to fast the rest of the day. Can you do that? Yeah, you can do that for a recommended fast. But for making up a day or for fasting in Ramadan, of course, you cannot do that. The intention is from night. How does the intention happen? Intention happens by anything that leads to your preparation for the day of fasting, whether it's suhoor or sleeping at a certain time or even having the thought in your mind. This is just the first thing that they mention, and that's a distinction between the recommended fast and the required fast. When do you need to have the intention? Of course, for Ramadan, it's different than a recommended fast, and for qada, qada takes the ruling of Ramadan in this regard. So the first thing is intentions. The second thing is, and this is the very important discussion that's very drawn out and detailed, and inshallah I'm going to share some details about it with you, is al-imsaku an al-muftirat, is avoiding all invalidators of fasting. Now, one question is, we know this word in English, even the English audience, you know this word, imsak. What does imsak mean? Imsak means abstaining from eating or drinking or doing anything that would invalidate your fast. When do you have to do that? You have to do that as soon as Fajr comes in. Now, the question comes about is, what if adhan is going off and I have some water, I have a cup in my hand or have something in my mouth. As soon as that goes off, I must completely abstain from eating. I cannot eat or drink at all. And if I have anything in my mouth, I must spit it out. This is, of course, according to the vast majority of scholars. And if you were to eat or drink after that, then of course it would invalidate the fast. Now, of course, sometimes you might make a mistake. This might happen for iftar, or it might happen for fasting. Say you woke up and you were sleepy and you did not realize that Fajr went off. Now, and you took a bite, and you were now, of course, if there was some negligence, now the requirement before you eat anything for suhoor is that you need to verify that daylight has not come in. Say if you did not verify and there was some negligence in that regard, there's not going to be any sin. But in this case, since the 1/8 after Fajr came in, then that individual is going to need to withhold from eating the rest of the day, and they're going to need to make up that fast after Ramadan passes, because the scholars, they have a principle. They say لا عبرة بالظن البين خطأه. There's no consideration given to an assumption that has become evident that it was an error. No sin, but the day is going to be having to be made up. Same thing when it comes to breaking your fast. Say if you thought adhan for Maghrib came in, and you broke your fast just maybe 2 or 3 minutes before the adhan of Maghrib. Now that fast is, since it was before Maghrib, and of course, again, we said we're training ourselves to have the attitude of ubudiyya and our relationship with Allah Azza wa Jal, and we have these requirements and but that are based on the hadith of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and the verses of the Quran. The clear direction and the clear guidance that we find there is if one breaks their fast before the Maghrib comes in, they're going to have to make up that day. No sin, no blame, even if it was just by a few minutes. And this happened actually at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, especially for them. They did not have the calculations that we have access to today. It was a very cloudy day, and they presumed that Maghrib had entered, but in actuality it didn't. So they broke their fast. So they were commanded after Ramadan to make up that day because they broke their fast on the assumption that Maghrib came in and it had not actually come in. So that's a little bit about that question and that issue. So there's no legal precedent for one whose assumption is an error. No sin, but if your assumption was contrary to reality, then you're just going to need to make it up with another fast. Now, the invalidators of fasting. Of course, when it comes to invalidators of fasting, at the top of the list is for a husband and wife to have intimacy with one another. And of course, if this is done intentionally, it's known to be one of the major sins. And if it was done intentionally during the day of Ramadan, and there's going to need to be an expiation of fasting that we'll mention in the end. There's a special hadith about it. I'll wait to mention the expiation over there. Expiation means Kuffara, by the way. So that's the first invalidator of fasting, for there to be intimacy, marital relations, full marital relations. That's what I mean by intimacy, full marital relations between a husband and wife. Now, are any other forms of intimacy permissible? Now, of course, there are certain things that are not permissible, but they may not break the fast. Now, I'll give you some details. What about kissing? Can one هل تحل القبلة للصائم? Can one fasting kiss their spouse? Now, if it's going to lead to lustfulness, especially for people who are young or newlywed, if it's going to lead to something else, then it's not allowed. It's haram, it's prohibited. If it doesn't lead to lust, then it's makruh, it's min makruhat as-siyam, and it should be avoided. But it will only invalidate fasting if it leads to something else. If it leads to something coming out of the body, if it leads to ejaculation, then it would break your fast. Some people usually have the question about, all right, what if, especially for our young men, the ruling of masturbation and things of the sort. Of course, masturbation is haram, it's not allowed, and it's considered a sin. And if one does it while they're fasting, it will break their fast. And so please take note of that. So now, what if someone does it by mistake? What are they going to need to do? Are they going to need to do a kafara and an expiation? No. They're not going to need to do that. The only thing they're going to be required to do is to make up the day. Now, say if someone does some other thing, like say eating and drinking, we know it's haram. Say if you eat or drink during the day of Ramadan out of negligence, someone is away from Allah Azza wa Jal, or maybe perhaps was away from Allah for years and did these things out of negligence. They did it on purpose. They just chose not to fast a day. If you do this, then is there any kafara or expiation required? No. All you have to do is make up the day. But of course, the sin for it is a major sin. And some of the scholars, they say even if the person was to fast the entire year, it would not account for the merit and the special virtue of one of the days of Ramadan. right? So that's one thing there. If someone breaks their fasting by lustful thoughts, or by masturbation, or by eating or drinking, or something of the sort, it's a sin if they do it with intent. But the only thing they'll be required to do is to make up the day, nothing beyond that. Now, some people usually have the question, what about waking up in a major state of impurity? Now, say if someone had, say if both situations, for a man, if you had a wet dream during the night and you woke up in a major state of impurity, or for a woman, if her menstrual cycle ends at night and she confirms that it ended at night before Fajr, but she didn't take the shower until after Fajr. What's the ruling of that? Yes, the fasting is not affected by being in a major state of impurity. You have to just take that shower and do the ghusl, and you continue your fast without any problem. So that's an important thing to note there. So of course things like if the major state of impurity was to happen after the day of fasting began, like say for example, if the woman's menstrual cycle began a moment or even a few minutes after Fajr, then of course she's not going to fast that day. And if her menstrual cycle was to begin a few minutes before Maghrib, just a few minutes before Maghrib, then she will have to make up that day after Ramadan. And this is not a form of penalizing anyone. It's not a form of penalizing our sisters at all. In fact, inshallah, they'll get the rewards for their intentions, and they'll get the rewards for the struggle of that day. Because of the rules that our Prophet ﷺ taught us and the Deen teaches us, the day would just have to be made up after Ramadan. Now, another thing that people often ask, if I throw up, does it break my fast? And now, the Prophet ﷺ, he taught us in the hadith that the individual إذا ذرعه القيء لا يجب عليه القضاء. The individual who is overcome, it's out of his will, he could not hold it back, the throw up. And if it was to come out, individual does not have to make up the fast, and in fact you continue your fast. Well, there's no issue, no effect. The only time that throw up would break your fast is if it was done intentionally, meaning that the individual could have withheld or held back some of the things, but instead chose to throw it up. So that's another question that we often get. Now, coughing up phlegm or mucus from the chest, does that break the fast? It doesn't break the fast, but if it comes up, you should not allow it to go back down. You should spit it out, because if you allow it to go back down, it'll be problematic in terms of the fasting. So intentionally. What about if the individual was to drink water? Well, we have a few different situations. Now, an individual who drinks it forgetting that he's fasting, individual, there's no blame upon that person at all. As the hadith mentions, فَإِنَّمَا أَطْعَمَهُ اللَّهُ وَسَقَاهُ. The individual continues fasting and there's no blame upon him. The second situation is if the individual was making wudu and was excessively rinsing the mouth or blowing the nose, and because of this, of doing this excessively, some of the water went down the throat. In this case, the وَبَالِغْ فِي الْمَضْمَضَةِ وَالْإِسْتِنْشَاقِ إِلَّا أَن تَكُونَ صَائِمًا. If the individual does it excessively, then they'll be liable for this, and it'll break their fast, and they'll have to make it up afterwards. Now, what about if, so that's the second situation. If it's done accidentally, but because of the person's negligence, the individual was excessive in rinsing their mouth or blowing their nose, that's another situation That would break the fast. All right. Now, can I brush my teeth while I'm fasting? Yes, absolutely. There's no issue with brushing your teeth or rinsing your mouth while you're fasting. But you need to be very careful that none of the toothpaste gets taken in, because that would break your fast if you were to swallow any of the toothpaste. So you need to rinse the mouth very well and make sure that you don't swallow any of it. Some of the scholars say that after dhuhr time, you need to be careful. After midday, it's best to avoid brushing your teeth, because when you brush your teeth after midday, you're going to be removing the effects of ibadah. And of course, it's known that the for uh, the change لخلوف فم الصائم أطيب عند الله من ريح المسك. The change in the smell of the mouth of the one who's fasting by Allah Azza wa Jal has special merit, and that is because it's the effects of the ibadah. And when you brush your teeth to remove the effects of that ibadah, you're doing something that's contrary to what is preferred, and it's best to avoid doing that. So that's what about swallowing the effects of food between the teeth? You need to be very careful from this when you're fasting, especially if you have big suhoor, and you fill your stomach, and because of that you did not rinse out your mouth good, then in this case one must be careful, because if you swallow that food that's stuck between the teeth intentionally, then it will break the fast. But if your mouth is cleansed very well and some stuff remain and it's hard to remove it, don't make it a waswasa, don't make it a whisper. So that's an important point to note over there about swallowing the effects of the food between the teeth. If it flows with the saliva and it cannot be distinguished and it's unintentionally swallowed, then there's no blame, because there's no negligence in this case. You tried your best to rinse your mouth. What if one swallows his own phlegm or mucus? We addressed this before. If it comes towards the mouth and then the individual swallows it back, then it would invalidate the fast if he could have removed it. But if he could not, and it just stays in the throat and it goes down, or someone who's sick, sometimes it goes from the nose right to the throat, then in this case it doesn't. Does swallowing saliva invalidate one's fast? Well, of course, if it's your own saliva, then it's not going to invalidate your fast at all. Now, there's many other questions that we often get asked relating to doing certain things while we're fasting. Can you donate blood while you're fasting? Does donating blood affect your fast at all? No, it does not affect your fast at all. You can donate blood while you're fasting. Of course, just be careful that you'll have the energy to make it through the rest of the day, and it won't be difficult for you to continue your fast. Another thing that we're usually asked about is the issue of nose drops. If you take a nose drop, does it affect your fast? Well, the nose drop, if some of the scholars, they say regardless, categorically, the nose drop will affect your fast. Some other scholars, they say if you do not feel the effects of it with the moisture or the taste in your mouth or in your throat, then it doesn't break your fast. But the nose drop, I would encourage you to avoid it while you're fasting. Now, what about eardrops? The eardrops, what is the ruling regarding eardrops? The majority of scholars would say that eardrops, if it enters in the ear, then in this case, and meaning it's not from the outside, it's going to break the fast. However, the Maliki school says that it does not break the fast, and many scholars today, they say about eardrops that they do not break the fast. So there's a difference of opinion. So what should I do? I gave you guys two opinions. There's both opinions there. Alhamdulillah, اختلاف أمتي رحمة. When you find multiple opinions among the scholars, if you find yourself in some hardship because of some medical situation, then فَلْيُقَلِّدْ مَنْ أَجَازَ. You can follow the opinion of those who allow. This is a general precedent that the scholars they teach us. When you're in some undue hardship, that you can follow the opinion that allows. So about eardrops, does it break the fast or not? Well, and traditionally speaking, the majority of scholars said it does break the fast, but some scholars, like the Maliki school, said it doesn't. And many scholars today follow this opinion. Now, another issue that we're often asked about, what about the eye drops? The eye drops, they don't break your fast. What about an inhaler? Now, for inhalers, there's also, again, that difference of opinion. Now, inhalers, some of them say that because what breaks the fast, what's the definition of it? It's وصول عين إلى جوف من منفذ مفتوح. It is for a substance to reach a bodily cavity from an open passageway. That's the criteria for what breaks the fast. Now, when it comes to the inhaler, do we consider the throat a bodily cavity? If we're going to consider it a bodily cavity, it's going to break the fast. If we don't consider the throat a bodily cavity, then we're going to say it doesn't break the fast. Because the moisture that's from the inhaler, it evaporates, or it doesn't reach the maida. It doesn't go down. It just stays in the throat area. So in this case, some scholars, they said it doesn't break the fast. And others said it does break the fast. So based on the opinion that says it does break the fast, what am I supposed to do? Now, if according to the opinion that says it does break the fast, then I need to see, can I limit my usage of the inhaler to the times before and after fasting? If the answer is no, then I am what is referred to in the books of fiqh as min ashab al-a'dhar. I am excused from fasting if I'm from those who are chronically ill. And in this case, instead of fasting, all I have to do is to give a fidya for each day I'm unable to fast. So, when we say that there's an opinion that says the inhaler breaks the fast, this isn't to cause undue hardship. No, it's just to say that there's another procedural thing that this person needs to follow. And that is they're from the chronically ill, so they're not even required to fast. If the situation is that they need to constantly use their inhaler, and of course, when we're talking about the inhaler that has some chemicals that would go to the throat. The inhaler that's just for air, this doesn't break the fast at all. This is important to note here. About the CPAP machine, would that break the fast? No, it would not break the fast. There's also a few other things. I'll get them for you. So like the oxygen mask, does the oxygen mask break the fast? The CPAP machine or the air inhaler, inhaling air doesn't break your fast. But when it comes to the asthma inhaler that has chemicals, there's a difference of opinion about it. As I say, many modern scholars do not consider it an invalidator because the chemicals remain in the throat, but the traditional opinion is that it breaks the fast, and in this case, the person would be from the chronically ill. Now, what is the ruling of needle injections during the fast? الحقنة الوريدية. So الحقنة الوريدية, it depends on what type of needle we're speaking about. If we're talking about an intravenous injection meaning when there's a حقنة to الوريد, to the veins, in this case, there are two opinions. Now in our modern times, there's a dominant opinion that says it depends. What type of needle was it? Was it glucose? Was it something that nourishes the body? In this case, if it was glucose and it nourishes the body, it's going to break the fast. If it was any other thing that was injected into the veins that doesn't nourish the body, what I mean by nourish the body, it doesn't give the body strength, then in this case, it will not break the fast. So that's the situation. Again, I'll say it one more time. Do needles break your fast? If you're talking about an intravenous needle, meaning right into your veins, then there's two types. Something like glucose that'll nourish your body, and other things, other chemicals that will not nourish the body and give it strength. In this case, if it nourishes the body, it breaks the fast, otherwise it doesn't. What about other types of injections, like intramuscular injections or subcutaneous injections, something like in the skin, on the buttocks or the upper arm or on the thigh or on the back? Does this break the fast? No, it doesn't break the fast at all, right? So, and as we said, donating blood does not break the fast at all as well. So those are some of the things about the invalidators of fasting. Now, what about breaking your fast for some type of excuse? Now, there's a few different types of excuses. Now, as we said, like before, forgetfully eating or drinking, does that break your fast? No, it does not at all. Now, what about if you are from in an if you have an excusable circumstance? Does that break your fast, or are you blameworthy for that in any way? No. What's an excusable circumstance like? Like the elderly, or the frail, or someone who has a chronic illness. These are individuals who aren't required to fast, you know. And being that they're not required to fast, what are they supposed to do? They do what we call, they give what we call fidya. Fidya is for every day in which they can't fast. They give a monetary amount. They say it's about $10 per day. So so that's their requirement. The elderly, the frail, and the chronically ill. What about the temporarily ill? Of course, these فمن كان منكم مريضا أو على سفر فعدة من أيام أخرى. So temporary illness, if it's severe, or if it's in a way that would make it difficult to fast, that would also excuse the individual from fasting. But if it's a very mild illness that doesn't affect your fast, then you shouldn't break your fast. So that's about temporary illness. What if you have a physically demanding job, like you work in construction or some other form of labor? You know, can you break your fast from the get-go? You cannot break your fast from the get-go, but now it's going to be day by day. Say you start your fast and it's a really difficult day at work, it's hot, you're sweating, and you feel extremely exhausted. If you feel extreme exhaustion that you cannot continue the day of fasting because of it, you're excused. You can break your fast. And you know what? That's applicable to other situations. Like I got a question recently about someone who gets severe migraines, and it's so severe that it completely debilitates them. And I told this person, first they need to get medically checked to see what's the cause for this, if there's any type of thing that would help remedy the situation. And if the situation is that there's no solution at all, then this individual needs to gauge themselves. If it's so difficult that it's debilitating, then they are excused from fasting that day. And if this happens in a certain time of the year, like for example during the summer when the days of fasting are longer, then in this case, that individual should wait till the days are shorter to make up the Ramadan days that they missed, like wait to the winter. If that isn't a viable solution, even if they were to fast in winter, the headaches would be debilitating and they cannot function at all, then this individual is excused from fasting, and they will be considered like the chronically ill. So I'll go back and say one more time. Having a physically demanding job, does it excuse an individual from fasting? No, of course it does not. Unless, and this is going to be on a day-by-day basis, unless you get so exhausted that you cannot continue, then you can break your fast for that day, right? And then you'll just have to make it up later on. Now, what if you have some sport, some team, you play for a team, you have some sporting event, and it would be difficult for you to participate if you were to fast. Now, of course, and you know, I really encourage everyone to have their priorities straight on these types of issues. Be careful, you know, not to give precedence for a game or a sporting event over fasting the required fast of Ramadan. So it's very important to keep this in mind. Having a game at school, subhanAllah, we're not in, we don't have, our children aren't in their schools now, but in the future, just to note, that would not excuse a person from fasting the day of Ramadan. Now, if you do some, physical work at school and you get exhausted to the point where you cannot continue fasting, then at that point you can break your fast. Like that's the ma'yar, that's the scale. If you get so exhausted that you cannot continue fasting, then you're from the temporarily ill, and you'll just have to make up the day later. But now another question is, can you swim while you're fasting? Well, yeah, as long as you don't swallow the water, there's no issue with your body being submerged in water. As long as you don't accidentally swallow any of the water, you can fast. You can swim while you're fasting without any problem. The traveler, the traveler is also another individual who's excused from fasting. But again, this is only if the day of fasting starts while you're traveling. Meaning, say if you're going to travel after Dhuhr, but you're still a resident for half of the day. Can you break your fast for the whole day because you're going to travel midday? No, you cannot. That day you're required to fast. But say if your traveling was going to last for a few days, and can you break the second day and the third day and the fourth day? Yes, you can, no problem. Traveling is an excuse from fasting. What about pregnancy or breastfeeding? I see some of the comments. You can ask a question besides the topic for today. I'll try my best to answer. I'm getting close to finishing actually, and I'm going to go through all the questions that I get and try my best to answer. Bidnillahi ta'ala. So now, what about pregnancy or breastfeeding? Is an excuse for breaking the fast? Now, I'll start off with explaining the following. The woman during pregnancy, women during pregnancy vary from person. Their situation varies, from person to person, woman to woman. Their strength during their pregnancy is different. Now, some women, do not find, severe, pain or exhaustion or nausea or headaches while they're fasting. And in this case, their ruling would be different than someone who has a very severe experience during their pregnancy. Now, when you break your fast during pregnancy, you're either breaking it because of something relating to you as a pregnant woman, or for some concern for the child, or for both. Now, if you're breaking your fast because you have an extremely massive migraine or a headache, or you're extremely nauseous, or you're so weak, especially because of the toll of pregnancy on your body, then in this case, all you'll have to do is make up the fast afterwards. And then the same goes for what if you're told by your medical doctor that fasting poses some threat on the pregnancy. Are you excused from fasting? Yes, you are excused from fasting in this case. But if you don't have the statement of a trusted medical doctor to break your fast, pregnancy in itself isn't necessarily going to mean that you could break your fast. It depends on your body, and it depends on the condition of your pregnancy. If the doctors tell you you should not fast because it threatens the life of your baby, or it threatens your life personally, then you're excused from fasting. So pregnancy, the same thing would apply to breastfeeding. Breastfeeding is like pregnancy. Now, can the breastfeeding woman break her fast? Yes, she can, because breastfeeding is from the rights of the child, and it creates a special intimate relationship between the mother and the child. Even if the woman can give formula, Sharia would not require a woman to stop breastfeeding her child and give the child formula instead. When would breastfeeding be an excuse? If fasting would mean that she would not be able to breastfeed. If that's what it means, and there's no way to work around it, like to pump the milk from the night, or if it would completely dry up and she would not be able to breastfeed her child, then in this case she can break her fast, and then she would just need to make it up afterwards. Now, I mentioned to you guys earlier that I would explain to you what kafara is. There was a situation, it's a very interesting story during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. One of the companions made a big mistake. He had intimate relations with his wife during the day of Ramadan. And he came to the Prophet ﷺ and he said, I am ruined. I am ruined. And the Prophet ﷺ said, what's the matter with you? So he said, I had sexual relations with my wife in Ramadan. And so the Prophet ﷺ asked him a series of questions. He said, do you have a servant to free? He said, no. He said, can you fast 2 consecutive months? He said, no. He could not physically, he was physically frail and unable to fast. So that was another excuse for fasting that he had. So can you fast 2 consecutive months? He told the Prophet ﷺ, no. He said, do you have the finances to feed 60 poor people? He told the Prophet ﷺ, no. So the Prophet ﷺ told him to sit down and wait. And the Prophet waited for revelation and guidance on the issue. So then the Prophet ﷺ received a gift of a basket of dates. And he said, take this basket of dates and give it to the poorest person you know in Medina. And he told the Prophet ﷺ, I don't know anyone poorer than me. So the Prophet ﷺ said, then take it to your home and feed it to your family. So this hadith teaches us the ruling of kafara. When do you have to do kafara, expiation? Expiation is to cover is a form of repentance for committing something that breaks the fast. One type of thing falls under this category, that is having intimate relations with the spouse during the day of Ramadan. Now, it would not apply to breaking your fast by eating or drinking or any other means. This kafara is going to be fasting 2 consecutive months, every single day of the month. That would be exclusively for that and for nothing else. So there's other things to mention about fasting. There's another thing that we often get, another question. What about delaying the qada of Ramadan? Now, many people, they may be making up days from the previous Ramadan, and you only have a few days left to do it. And I encourage you to please hasten in doing it. Now, what about if Ramadan comes in and you do not finish making up your days? Then in this case, after Ramadan, you're going to need to do it immediately. And with the making up the day, you're going to need to give a fidya for every day you delayed, because the time frame you have to make up those days is from one Ramadan to the next, right? So that's the issue about delaying qada. It must be made up immediately, and along with making it up, a fidya must be given for every single day. So another thing that is asked about, making up days on behalf of the deceased. All right, so if someone in your family passes away and they're chronically ill or excused from fasting, there's no requirement upon the family to make up the day at all. In fact, the only thing that's required is to give the fidya that was required for those days, especially if someone who is ill. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give shifa to all of our brothers and sisters in the hospital. If you have a family member who's in the hospital and cannot fast this entire month, and then the requirement is to give fidya for those days that they cannot fast. If a family member passes away, then the family would not be required to make up the fast, but instead can give fidya from the inheritance that they leave behind. And there's actually a hadith from the Prophet ﷺ about that. Now, some of the recommended things to do while you're fasting. The first thing is have suhoor. تَسَحَّرُوا فَإِنَّ فِي السَّحُورِ بَرَكَةً. Have suhoor because there's blessings and barakah in the suhoor, as our Prophet ﷺ said. Hasten to do iftar. Don't delay the iftar. And so the best thing to do is to hasten an iftar and to delay suhoor. The best time to have suhoor is just before Fajr. The best time to have iftar is immediately after Maghrib. Make sure that you make dua every single day, especially right before iftar, because the Prophet ﷺ said, لِلصَّائِمِ دَعْوَةٌ مُسْتَجَابَةٌ لَا تُرَدْ. For the one who's fasting is a prayer that's won't be turned away. So that's another thing to do. Another recommended thing is to break the fast on dates. And another recommended thing to do is to feed those fasting. Now, we can't do this, unfortunately, physically this year because of the circumstances, but you can give some money to some organizations who are giving food packages to the needy brothers and sisters overseas, and I would encourage you to take advantage of this. There's many other recommended things that one can do during fasting, but those are some of them. Those are most of the subjects. I'm going to go to the questions now and see what questions we have here. The first question here is, if I prick my finger to check my blood since I have diabetes, do I break my fast? No, absolutely not. Pricking your finger to check the blood is not something that would break your fast. As we said, withdrawing blood in general doesn't break your fast aslan. What is the opinion of the scholars on, okay, so that's a different question. It's about mortgage and paying interest. I'll leave that for now and see if there's any other question about fasting. All right, is it better for me to pray Taraweeh alone or in a jama'ah with those at home? No, Taraweeh is one of the recommended acts of worship that are to be done in jama'ah. So it's best to do Taraweeh as a jama'ah at home. It's better doing that than praying it alone. And of course, as we said earlier, can you pray Taraweeh through live stream? No, you cannot pray Taraweeh through live stream. How much is fidya? Fidya is about $10 for every single day for the one who's required to do it. Can I hold the Quran while praying Taraweeh or leading my family in Taraweeh? Absolutely. Can I play video games while I'm fasting? You can play video games while you're fasting, but of course it's best to take advantage of the time fasting doing useful acts of worship to the best of your ability. But playing video games while you're fasting doesn't affect your fast in any way, even though it might make your parents unhappy if you do it for too long. So that's the next question. The next question here is it possible to do the Sunnah fast on Thursday, the day before Ramadan? So this is a question here. It's known that fasting after the half of Sha'ban is not allowed unless it's for making up fasting, or is not encouraged, I should say, unless you're making up a day, or if you have a routine or a habit of fasting. So if you have a routine of fasting that you've been doing all year round or from months before, then you can fast Thursday, even if it's the day before Ramadan, because it's your ada. Now, I just want to inform the people that are on Instagram, it's going to cut me off in about a minute, so I'm going to try my best to get to your questions here before it cuts off. The question. My son likes to lead us in Salah. He's 13. Is this accepted? The answer is yes. There's no problem with the child leading. If he's younger than Bulu, as long as he knows how to lead Salah and he knows the basic requirements. I would encourage, if he's really young, to leave that for the nawafil, not for the required salahs. Now, I have an 11-year-old daughter that struggles to fast. She gets very weak and pale and sick. What can I do to encourage her? Now, of course, this goes back. So if she gets really sick, in which it's taking a toll on her body, she has the excuse to break her fast. Don't push her beyond her limits. I would encourage you to do that. For the Instagram crowd, when it cuts us off now, I'm going to try to restart the feed and inshallah continue with answering your questions. Jazakumullah khair. Now, I'm going to see if we have any questions on the Facebook. Bismillah. For the Facebook, I'm looking. This is one of the recommend because it's your ada. Now, I just want to inform. On the Facebook, I do not see any questions, which is good, alhamdulillah. For the Instagram, if I see any questions, they're going to need to be posted again. Is it allowed to make up Ramadan days right now when Ramadan is next week? The answer is absolutely. You can make, in fact, you should be doing that. It's your requirement to make them up as soon as possible. You can continue to do that from now all the way until Friday. Can I, as a female, lead my husband, family members in prayers? I don't encourage this. You should not do this. But especially if your husband knows how to recite. If your husband knows how to recite Quran, even at a basic level, then he should lead in prayers. Wallahu alam. Let's see if we have any other questions here, even if they're not related. And if I can't make them up, what are the rules for that? So as we said earlier, if you do not make them up before Ramadan comes in, then you have to make them up immediately after Ramadan. And then on top of that, you're going to have to pay a fidya for every day because you delayed in making up the days. So, and that fidya is about $10 per day, as we said. Can we listen to rap music and nasheeds while fasting? Now, the music is a separate issue. Is it halal or is it haram? There's a detailed discussion about that. What's the content of it? Are there any instruments? Are there bad words and foul language? There's a lot of detail that needs to be discussed with that. But if you're talking about nasheeds, Islamic nasheed, of course you can listen to nasheeds while you're fasting. It doesn't affect your fasting at all. Can you watch a movie while you're fasting? Yes, you can. Can you watch television while you're fasting? Yes, you can. You being able to do it doesn't necessarily mean that's what you should be doing. Right? So we need to distinguish between the two. It's best to try to make best use of your time, during fast, in ibadah, in dhikr, in talab ilm, in having a positive discussion with family. So I encourage all of this to be done. Wallahu a'lam. Now the next question we have here is is a fast broken by masturbation? Isn't 60 days required, not only one? No, it's only one day that's required. This is a common misconception, especially for our shabab. I'm going to say this again. Of course, masturbation is haram. It's forbidden to do this. If you do it, if you're overcome by shahwa, and you end up doing this and it breaks, it's going to break your fast, absolutely. And it's a sin and it's a very big act of negligence. But what are you going to do to make up for this? Then in this case, you're going to have to just make up the day. There's not going to be anything beyond that. Okay. And then we have another question here. So of course, the basics, I just want to emphasize this again. We mentioned this already. The current situation, does it affect the fasting? Like coronavirus, does it excuse one from fasting? No, absolutely. It doesn't excuse one from fasting unless they have it and they have severe symptoms that would make it difficult for them to fast. But the fear of getting sick doesn't excuse one from fasting. If you are sick and it's very difficult for you to fast because you have severe symptoms, then absolutely you're excused from fasting without any hesitation, and all you have to do is make up those days later on. There's a question here. Are the blessings less for those who can't fast due to chronic illness? The answer is absolutely not. Brothers and sisters who have some type of chronic illness, I know this is very difficult upon you. Everyone's preparing to fast and enjoy the spiritual experience of Ramadan, but you're unable to do that because of something that's out of your hands. I want to just remind everyone, this does not uh, there's not any blame and not any sin, and there's not any less reward for someone. In fact, the Sunnah teaches for someone who cannot fast due to a chronic illness. The Sunnah actually teaches us that the individual who was fasting who was doing an act of worship at a certain time, and then إذا مرض العبد أو سافر كتب له من العمل ما كان صحيحا مقيما. He's given the reward. The individual who travels or becomes ill is given the reward that he would be given when he was healthy, when he was doing those acts of worship. So there's another one. Allahumma ameen. One of the sisters commented, may this Ramadan bring the utmost health, wealth, and contentment for us all. And I say Allahumma ameen to that. Inshallah, we're going to have a full Ramadan program this month. Inshallah, it's going to be full of different things between the mashayikh and between guests that we're going to be bringing in. Inshallah, be a very unique experience for us all. And I look forward to the experience, even though we wish we could be in our masajid together every night in Taraweeh and I'tikaf. Inshallah, it'll be special in its own regard. Inshallah, I guess with this, it seems like all of the questions had been answered. So I will stop here, and inshallah we'll continue next week with another session for the community hub, but it's going to be a community hub Ramadan special. We're going to continue the community hub. It's going to be at a different time, of course. It's not going to be at 8 o'clock because that's going to be the time where we're going to be having our first iftar, but it's going to be at night. It's going to be at 10:30 p.m. and inshallah ta'ala every Friday, and we're going to be announcing our program in the next few days. جزاكم الله خيرا والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.